Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. They say every town has one. That house, the one you dare your friends to walk past at night. The one with the sagging porch, the broken windows, the trees that seem to lean in too close, where the air always feels a little colder and the silence is thicker than it should be. Ours was on the corner of Haddon Street and Oak Ridge Lane, just past the edge of town, where the houses get farther apart and the woods press in on both sides. It wasn't the kind of place you found on Zillow. No realtor signs, no renovations. Just a rotting husk of a building, swallowed slowly by ivy and time. And for as long as I can remember, nobody talked about it. Not in school, not at church, not even during those campfire ghost stories when every other house in the neighborhood got dragged into some tale or another. That one, it was like it had been scrubbed from everyone's memory, everyone's except mine. I grew up just 3 blocks from that place. Rode past it every day on my way to school, usually pedaling a little faster once I hit the bend where its roof peeked through the tree line. And even then, even when I was 10 and fearless in all the ways only a kid can be, I knew not to go near it. You could feel it, like the house itself was watching, when I was 13. I got dared to break in. It was summer, hot, boring. The kind of day where the heat sticks to your skin, like a second layer, and all you want to do is stir up trouble. Me, Corey, and Luke were sitting behind the gas station, drinking warm soda and talking trash. Luke was the one who brought it up. Said we should go inside the Haddon house. Just peek around. Take a picture to prove we did it. I said no, maybe. It was the way the trees seemed to quiet down when he said it. Maybe it was the memory of that place looming on the edge of every childhood nightmare I'd ever had. But something about it just didn't sit right. Luke ended up going by himself that evening. Came back 20 minutes later, pale as paper. Wouldn't say what he saw. Just shook his head and said, "There's something wrong in there, man." And we never spoke of it again. He moved away the next year. I lost touch. Corey too. And over time, like everyone else in town, I stopped thinking about the Haddon house. Grew up, got a job, moved to the city, tried to forget. But memories are like rot. Bury them deep enough and they still find their way to the surface. I moved back to take care of my mother after her stroke. Just for a while, I told myself, but a while turned into months, then a year. My old bedroom still had posters from high school on the walls. My closet still had shoes I outgrew a decade ago. It was like time had folded in on itself. One evening, I was driving home from the grocery store, windows down, radio off. It was that late hour when the sky turns the color of old bruises and everything looks a little less real. I don't know why I took the long way back. Maybe I wanted to see how much had changed. Maybe I was chasing something I couldn't name. But I turned onto Oak Ridge, past the miller's barn, then the hollowed-out train depot. And then, there it was, the Haddon house, still standing, still wrong. I don't know what I expected maybe. That it would have finally collapsed in on itself, or burned down, or been bulldozed for condos. But no, it looked almost exactly the same as it had 20 years ago. Same boarded-up windows, same rusted mailbox, same paintless siding and blackened roof tiles. Except now, it looked even older, like the world around it had moved on, and it was still stuck in whatever nightmare it came from. I pulled over, sat there, engine idling, staring, and I swear to God, I felt it again. That pressure behind my eyes, like something was pushing back from inside the house, like it knew I was there. I drove away, told myself it was nothing, just nostalgia playing, tricks, but later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Luke, about how he never said what he saw, about how nobody ever really asked the next day. I went to the library and tried to find anything about the house. Zoning reports, crime logs, real estate records, but there was nothing after 1986, like the house just stopped existing. No owner on file, no arrests, no fire code violations, not even a power bill, just a black hole in the middle of town. That was the moment I knew I had to go back. Not on a dare, not for fun, not even for answers. I didn't expect to find anything, not really, but I had to see it for myself. As an adult, with my own eyes, I had to know if it really was as bad as it felt. I waited until a cloudy day, overcast, grey, the kind of weather where shadows don't have anywhere to hide. I brought gloves, a flashlight, a crowbar in case, and parked 3 blocks away where nobody would see my car. The grass was tall, swallowing the walkway. The front door was hanging off its hinges. No lock, no signs of life. Just the deep, cold smell of mildew and something else I couldn't place sweet, like rotting fruit. I stepped inside. The floor creaked under my weight. Dust coated everything: furniture, stairs, picture frames warped by time. Most of the windows were boarded up from the inside. Whoever lived here didn't want to keep people out. They wanted to keep something in. The silence was absolute. Not even the wind made it inside. I started upstairs, 1 step at a time. The hallway was narrow, walls bowed inward, lined with peeling wallpaper that had once been yellow. I passed 3 empty rooms before I found it. The closet in the master bedroom, tucked behind a warped door. Something about it felt off. The floor inside was uneven. I stepped in, reached down, and felt a gap in the boards. My fingers caught the edge of something. Metal. I pulled. The board came loose with a groan that echoed through the house. Beneath it was a box, steel, heavy, locked. I didn't open it there. I didn't want to be in that house a second longer than I had to, so I took it, carried it out under my coat, like a thief, heart pounding, watching the windows for movement that never came. But the box was real, solid, cold, and whatever was inside, it had been waiting a long time to be found. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything changed. Because that box wasn't just forgotten, junk from some hoarder's attic. It was evidence, and I had just unearthed a piece of someone's nightmare, maybe even mine. When I got the box home, I didn't open it right away. I wish I could say I had the discipline to wait, that I laid it out on the table and started planning how to handle it, responsibly called the police, documented everything properly, treated it like potential evidence. But that's not what happened. The truth is, I sat on the edge of my bed and just stared at it. For hours, there was something unnatural about the way it felt. Not just heavy in the physical sense, though it was that, too, dense, cold. Like whatever was inside had been waiting for someone to find it. Like it wanted to be opened. The box was about the size of a toolbox, maybe 18 inches long, metal with reinforced edges. There were no markings on the outside except for a long, rusty padlock. It smelled faintly of old oil and earth, like it had been buried or stored in a place the sun never touched. I wore gloves when I carried it, but even through the leather, I could feel that weight, that cold. I thought about calling someone, the police, maybe, or a local historian. But what was I going to say? Hey, I broke into an abandoned house and stole something from under the floorboards. Mind taking a look? No, that wouldn't work. So I waited until after dark, when the house was still and my mother was asleep. I set the box down in the garage on my old workbench. The concrete floor felt safer, easier to clean if something went wrong. I turned on the single overhead light, grabbed my bolt cutters, and went to work on the padlock. It didn't give I had to brace the box between my knees and put my full weight on the cutters, the metal groaning with resistance. The sound echoed in the garage like a gunshot. For a moment, I was sure someone would hear, but nobody came. When the lock finally snapped, I flinched. There was no dramatic click, no hiss of gas, no secret compartment springing open, just a dull metallic pop and the sudden knowledge that there was nothing stopping me anymore. I hesitated, then I opened it. Inside was silence, but not the regular kind of silence, the kind you expect in a quiet room. This was thick, like the moment you turn off a loud fan and realize how much noise it had been making. The box seemed to steal the air from the room. There were no weapons, no cash, no diaries with confessions in blood-red ink, just photographs, dozens of them, Polaroids, curled at the edges, stuck together in places from moisture or time. Each one was sealed in a small plastic sleeve, like someone had tried to preserve them. Some were blurry, others were painfully clear, and they were all wrong. The first showed a young woman, early 20s, maybe sitting in a folding chair. Her face was bruised. There was duct tape over her mouth. Her eyes were open, alive, terrified. The second showed what I think was the same woman, but from a different angle. This time she was lying down. The lighting was darker. There was blood. The third was of someone else, entirely a man in his 30s. Hands bound, eyes closed. I stopped counting after 20. Each photo was worse than the last. Some of them looked like surveillance shots. Some looked posed, staged, almost like someone had taken their time with the framing angled just so, capturing the horror with an eye that was too precise to be accidental. A collector's eye. That's when I found the map, folded beneath the final layer of photos. Wrapped in an old plastic grocery bag was a hand-drawn map. It had no title, no street names, just faint pencil lines, topographical contours, and 7 red X's scattered across it. One of them was circled in thick black marker. At first, I didn't recognize the layout, but then I saw it. The curved ridge near the southern edge, the old train tracks, a stream running east to west. It was my town, it was this town, and each X marked a specific location. Remote places, forgotten places, places where, if someone screamed, no one would hear. I sat there for a long time. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember turning out the garage light. All I remember is lying awake that night in bed, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that passed the window. My mind playing and replaying those images, the bound wrists, the empty eyes, and somewhere in the distance, the hollow thump of something metallic shifting. I didn't know if it was in my head or the garage. Either way, I didn't go check. The next morning, I locked the box in the trunk of my car and drove around for hours. No music, no destination. I just needed to think. And with every minute, a question kept rising up from the back of my mind, one I didn't want to ask, but couldn't stop myself from thinking. What if this wasn't the only box? What if there were more? What if someone had been doing this for years? What if they were still out there? And what if they knew I had it now? I stopped at a rest stop about 30 miles out of town, parked beneath a dead tree, opened my laptop, and pulled up a satellite map. I laid the hand-drawn map on the dashboard and compared the features, the angles, the lines, the marked locations. It all matched. Each X corresponded to a real place. Old quarries, fire break trails, drainage culverts. Even one site that looked like it was just a clearing in the woods near the edge of the state park. None of them were anywhere near roads or homes. Someone had gone out of their way to choose places no one would accidentally stumble across. I circled the first X on both maps. If this really was what I thought it was, if these photos were real, and these places were connected, then there might still be something out there. Evidence, or worse. Part of me wanted to forget the whole thing. Burn the photos, drop the box in a river, pretend I'd never opened it. But something deeper, quieter, colder part knew that wasn't an option. I had to see it through, because once you open a box like that, you can't just close it again. Not without knowing what's inside, and not without finding out who put it there. I don't know how long I sat there with the map on my dashboard and the box sealed tight in the trunk. I wasn't even sure what I was waiting for: confirmation, permission, maybe a sign that what I'd found wasn't as bad as it felt. But the truth was, the weight of that box had already started to change something in me. It was like I was carrying someone else's memories, someone else's crimes. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept hearing a ticking sound. Not from a clock. None were running in the house, but deep in my ears, like my brain was counting down to something. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with the box next to me, unable to open it again, unable to ignore it. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself forever, but I also couldn't just hand it over without knowing what it really was. The police might think I planted it, or worse, that I was involved. So I did what I always do when I don't know where to start. I began with what I could see, the photos. I spent most of the next morning laying them out on my garage floor, one by one, row by row. I wore gloves, partly out of paranoia, partly because I couldn't bear the idea of touching them with bare hands. There were 43 photos total. Some of the faces repeated same person, different positions, different levels of consciousness or injury. A few of the victims were clearly deceased, their eyes dull, skin pale. Others, well, it was hard to tell. The photos were all undated, no locations written on them, but whoever took them, they had a method, a pattern, same lighting, same type of camera, probably an old Polaroid 600, same perspective, a few feet away, slightly offset, as if the photographer wouldn't stand directly in front of the victims, like even they couldn't look them in the eye. Some of the backgrounds were blank, dirty walls, tarps, concrete, but others had details: chipped tiles, a wire-framed cot, a broken mirror in one corner. One photo had a calendar visible on the wall behind the woman. The month was October, but the year had been torn off. It was the only clue I had. I took the clearest photo, the one of the woman tied to the folding chair and, ran it through a facial recognition tool on a missing persons forum. It was a long shot. The picture was grainy, faded, and tilted. But within minutes, someone commented, "That looks like Elise Monroe, went missing in '97, upstate New York." I clicked the link and felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. The woman was the same, younger, sure, smiling, but the eyes, the jawline, the slight scar near her eyebrow, it was all there. According to the article, Elise had gone missing after closing up her bookstore. No signs of forced entry. No struggle, just vanished. The case had gone cold after 6 months, and now, here she was, in a chair, bruised, bound, terrified. It hit me like a freight train. These weren't just photographs. These were records. Proof, snapshots from the final moments or hours of people who never came home. I ran for more photos through the same method. 2 came back with tentative matches. A boy named Marcus Callow, age 17, missing since 1989. A woman named Andrea Little, disappeared during a road trip in 1994. Her car was found abandoned near a rest stop. Keys still in the ignition. The other 2 didn't yield anything. No matches, no names. Just blank silence from the internet. I wasn't ready for what I found at the bottom of the pile. It was the only image not in a plastic sleeve. The film was cracked, edges brittle, and the subject was smiling. It was a man maybe in his 60s, balding, wearing a sheriff's uniform, not tied up, not beaten, just smiling, standing in front of what looked like a barn door. In his hand was a Polaroid camera, the same kind of camera used to take all the others. My hands started to shake. I flipped the photo over. Something was written in thick, jagged pen. Me and my flock, all accounted for. There were no other images of him, just that one, like a signature, like a warning. I suddenly felt exposed, like someone was watching me through the walls. I relocked the box, shoved the photographs back inside, and slid it beneath a pile of junk in the far corner of the garage. Then I double-checked every window and door in the house. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the photo. His smile, that twisted sense of pride. Like he saw those people not as victims, but as trophies. And then I remembered the map, 7 X's, one of them circled. Each one, I now believed, was a place where someone had died, or worse, had been kept alive. I had to see one for myself, not because I wanted to. God knows, I didn't, but because I knew I'd never sleep again if I didn't. I picked the circled X first. It was the one closest to town, tucked between a stretch of defunct railroad tracks and a service road no one used anymore. I packed a flashlight, gloves, a first aid kit, and a utility knife. And then I drove. The location was harder to find than I expected. The road to it had eroded, and thick brush had swallowed the path. I parked near an old rusted gate and walked the rest of the way. The map said it would be just beyond the tree line, near an old maintenance building that had been condemned in the 90s. Sure enough, the concrete shell was still there, roof caved in, graffiti over the doors. It reeked of mold and something else I couldn't quite place. Something sour. I stepped inside, and that's when I saw it, in the corner. Behind a rusted filing cabinet, partially buried in dirt and pine needles, was an old pair of glasses. One of the lenses was cracked, the other was fogged over, and on the inside of the arm, scratched faintly with something sharp, was a name, E. Monroe. I nearly dropped the flashlight. I didn't find a body, no bones, no blood. But those glasses hadn't been placed there. They had fallen there, as if dropped, in a struggle, or tossed aside during something far, far worse. I stood in that room for what felt like an hour, frozen, unable to decide if I should keep looking or run back to my car and forget this ever happened. Eventually, I backed out. Slowly, quietly. The woods seemed too quiet as I walked back. No birds, no crickets, just the sound of twigs cracking under my feet. And maybe, just maybe, one set of footsteps too many. I didn't look back. I just got in the car and drove. But I knew what I'd found. This wasn't just some creepy old box from a forgotten house. This was a breadcrumb, trail dot, and something had left it behind on purpose. When I got home from the old maintenance building, I locked the doors. All of them, even the inside one that leads to the garage. Then I pulled the blinds shut and turned off all the lights. I didn't feel safe, and I didn't know why. I wasn't being followed, at least. Not that I could tell, but there was this heavy, unshakable weight hanging over everything. Like something had shifted the moment I found those glasses. Something was watching now. I went straight for the map, the original. Hand-drawn version was rough, just a network of curved lines, elevation marks, some crude symbols denoting water sources or buildings, and, of course, the 7 red X's. I'd already matched the first one to Elise Monroe's location. The circled X, the one that led to her broken glasses, that alone should have been enough to call the police. But how could I explain it? Hey, I broke into an abandoned house I was told never to go into, stole a steel box full of old victim photos, and found a 25-year-old woman's cracked glasses in the woods. Oh, and I have a hand-drawn map I think might be from a serial killer. Wanna check it out? No. They'd write me off as a nutjob or worse, a suspect. So instead, I spent the next 2 days doing what I do best. Research. I went to the public library, where I used the old microfilm machine in the corner, something most people under 30 don't even know exists. I looked up every missing person case in the county going back to 1970. Every case file, every newspaper clipping, every story about hikers vanishing, teens disappearing, runaways never making it to the bus stop. I found dozens. Most of them led nowhere. That was the terrifying part. No arrests, no major leads, just ... gone ... But then I started seeing a pattern, names, dates, locations. Several of the missing people were last seen in or around the same areas marked on the map. Different years, different circumstances, but all near the red X's. All within a 10-mile radius of the Haddon house. It was like a spider's web, with that place at the center. The earliest disappearance I could trace was in 1973, a college student named Valerie Beck. She went missing during a late-night drive from a diner on Route 27. Her car was found 4 days later. Keys still in the ignition, doors locked, no sign of her. Her boyfriend at the time was cleared, and the case faded into obscurity. Her car was discovered less than half a mile from the second X on the map. The next name that jumped out was David Allen, age 16, went missing in 1981 after attending a party at the lake with friends. He left early, said he was walking home, never arrived. His shoes were later found in a ditch behind an old paper mill, the same mill that sat near the third X dot. Then there was Monica Reyes, 22, a jogger who vanished during her regular trail run in 1992. A park ranger reported seeing her go in. No one saw her come out. Dogs picked up a scent, but lost it at the edge of the ravine, near where the 5th X landed. 7XS.7 disappearances. I could verify 7 possible victims, and that wasn't even counting the photos. I laid everything out across my garage wall, just like you'd see in one of those crime thrillers maps. Yarn, pushpins, notes. But this wasn't a movie. These were real people. Real families who'd waited years, maybe decades, without answers, without closure. The deeper I dug, the more horrifying it became. Most of these disappearances had never been connected. Different jurisdictions, different decades. Some were classified as runaways, others as accidents. A few were quietly buried in the paperwork of small-town apathy. But they were connected. I knew it, and whoever had drawn that map, they knew it to dot it. Was precise, almost surgical. These weren't random locations, they were carefully chosen drop sites. Remote, hard to access, places where no one would think to look, especially before GPS and drones. I started to wonder, was this map made by the killer, or someone trying to catch them? Because there was a kind of cold logic to it, like it wasn't just about where the bodies were left. It was a pattern, a circuit, a ritual. Maybe that's when I noticed the 8th mark. It wasn't a full X, just a faint scratch near the upper corner of the map. Like someone had started drawing one, then changed their mind, or didn't finish, and that unfinished X, it was directly over the Haddon house. I didn't know what that meant. Was it where it all began, where it ended, or was there someone still there? The worst thought hit me in the middle of the night, while staring at the map on my phone in the dark. What if the map wasn't a trail of where he'd been? What if it was a to-do list? I couldn't get the thought out of my head. Not as I brushed my teeth. Not as I tried to work. Not as I tried to sleep. And all the while, that box in the garage sat like a tumor beneath the surface of everything. I hadn't opened it again since that night. But it didn't matter. I could still feel it. Like it was leaking something. Not physically, emotionally, like dread in a liquid form, seeping into the walls. And every now and then, I'd swear I heard something from inside it. A soft clicking sound, like a camera shutter. I didn't sleep the night after I found the unfinished X on the map. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. Every shadow on the wall looked like it might move. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that the weight of all this research was getting to me. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever I had pulled out of that house, whatever I had dragged into my life by opening that box, wasn't just history. It was active. It was unfinished. Someone had left this behind, deliberately. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just meant to be found, it was meant to be followed. The next morning, I took the map back out and stared at the second red X. It was in a remote area, about 45 minutes north, beyond the state line and past where the GPS starts getting glitchy. I cross-referenced it with a topographical satellite view and found a thin line of trail, half forest by forest growth. It led to what looked like a dried-up creek bed behind an old, overgrown picnic area. Public land, unpatrolled, forgotten. I packed a shovel, gloves, flashlight, extra batteries, bottle of water. I told myself I wasn't expecting to find anything, that I just wanted to confirm the location. But the truth was, knew I was going to find something. I could feel it. In my teeth, I parked off the side of the road near a rusted sign that once read, "Welcome to Dogwood Grove." It was so faded I had to wipe moss off just to read it. The path down into the woods was steep and slick from rain the night before. Every few feet I had to stop to check the map, turning it over and comparing angles, trying to align the landmarks with the lines the killer or whoever had drawn. After nearly 20 minutes of hiking, I found it. The creek bed, it was bone dry, cracked. The exposed earth was scattered with dead leaves and broken branches. On the far side, the land rose into a shallow mound beneath a canopy of bent trees. The X on the map pointed directly to that mound. I stood there for a while. My fingers were shaking as I pulled on the gloves. I didn't even know what I expected to find. A body, bones, nothing at all. Maybe I was chasing ghosts, but then again, ghosts don't leave Polaroids. I began to dig. The ground was tough, compacted by years of silence. My shovel clanged against rocks, roots, and buried jungled beer cans, melted plastic, the carcass of a long-dead deer. I nearly gave up, nearly convinced myself this was nothing. But then about 2 feet down, I hit something that made a sound that wasn't a rock dot, clank dot metal. I scraped the dirt away with my hands. At first, it looked like part of an old trash can, rusted, curved. But as I cleared more of the soil, the shape emerged. A flat, rectangular sheet of metal maybe 2 feet by 4 feet bolted into something below it. It wasn't junk, it was a hatch. It had a handle. I paused. Everything inside me screamed, don't open it. But I'd come too far. I gripped the handle and pulled. The hatch resisted at first, sealed by years of wet soil and rust. But with one last heave, it tore open, letting out a breath of air that smelled like rot, wet wood, and something worse. The kind of smell you never forget. The kind of smell that says something used to be alive, and isn't anymore. Below the hatch was a wooden cavity like a coffin, but not built for comfort. Just a crude box dug into the earth. Inside was a metal frame bolted to the ground, and attached to it were shackles, rusty, worn dot, used, and in the corner. Half buried in wet leaves and dirt was a shoe, bright pink, child-sized dot. I backed away and vomited behind a tree. There was no body, no bones, not here. But this place wasn't just a dump site. It was a holding cell, a pit, a prison, and someone had once been kept here. Someone small. I sat on the edge of the pit, shaking, trying to catch my breath. The forest was silent. No birds, no insects, just the occasional drip of water from the trees above. I took photos. I documented everything, the hatch, the frame, the shoe, the rust patterns. Then I closed the hatch and covered it again with dirt and leaves. I told myself it was to preserve the scene, that I'd come back later with a plan. But if I'm honest, I just didn't want anyone to know I'd been there. On the hike back, I kept thinking I heard movement behind me. Dry leaves crunching, twigs snapping. But every time I turned, there was nothing, just the stillness. The feeling that I was being watched never went away. Even when I got back to the car and slammed the door shut, I didn't feel safe driving. Home, I passed through 2 towns I'd never heard of. The GPS kept losing signal. The road signs seemed off-bent at weird angles, covered in rust, names half erased by weather and time. I felt like I was moving through a forgotten layer of the world, a place where no one was meant to go. When I finally got back to the house, I locked everything again, double-checked every door and window. Then I went into the garage and opened the box one more time. This time, I wasn't looking at the photos. I was looking at him. The man in the sheriff's uniform. The one with the smile. The one holding the camera. I studied his face. Every wrinkle, every shadow. The pin on his lapel was too blurry to make out. But the photo had something I hadn't noticed before: reflection. In the top right corner, near the barn door behind him, there was a square glint of light. A mirror, a pane of glass. No, a picture frame. There was something behind him on the wall. A certificate, a diploma, maybe. I zoomed in as far as I could and enhanced the contrast. 3 letters became just barely legible: C-O ... And then, beneath that, Deputy of the Die. Felt a chill slide down my spine. He wasn't just wearing a costume. He really had been a sheriff. Or deputy. Some kind of law enforcement. Someone people trusted. Someone no one would ever suspect. And that's when I realized something even worse. What if this wasn't just one man? What if he wasn't working alone? After I saw the reflection in that photo, the certificate behind the man in uniform, something broke open in me. This wasn't some lunatic posing as an authority figure. This man was a deputy, a real one, and he had the goal to take those photos in uniform, probably right after a shift, still wearing the badge, the gun, the trust of the people. I couldn't get that out of my head. Deputy of the Year. That's what the blurred words on the certificate said. The photo was old, sure, but not ancient. I estimated the shot had to be from the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. Polaroid stock like that had been phased out around that time. The edges of the photograph, the slight yellowing, it all fit. I had a face now, a man in a badge, a timeline, and I had names, dozens of them. I sat at my computer until the sun came up, cross-referencing the dates on the backs of the photographs, with missing persons databases. It started slowly, plugging in names one by one. Most didn't yield anything, but a few did. And when they did, it was like someone pressed ice to the back of my neck. June 18th, 2002, Ella H. That was on one of the back-labeled photos. A girl with matted hair and eyes that didn't seem to focus. I typed the name and the year into a missing persons database. It hit. Ella Harper, age 14, went missing walking home from a summer church. Retreat, no leads. Disappeared off a rural road in northern Mississippi. Case still cold. And then another, November 4th, 1997, Bradley W.L. This one matched a missing 15-year-old boy last seen at a middle school football game just across the state border. No evidence of foul play. No suspects ever charged. One by one, the faces in the Polaroids began matching names in the real world. I wasn't looking at a scrapbook. I was looking at a kill ledger. But here's what made my blood run cold. Almost every match I found was in counties where the missing persons case had been handled internally. That is, by a small local sheriff's department, with no involvement from state or federal agencies. You know what that means. It means someone in uniform had the authority to control the search, to direct the press, narrative, to bury the case, to make sure no one looked too hard. And if that man in the photo, the one smiling in front of the shed with the pictures, was a real deputy, then it all made a kind of nightmarish sense. He didn't evade the investigation. He was the investigation. I tried to run facial recognition on the picture, but the grain was too poor. To analog, I had to go old school. I combed through yearbooks from police departments across a 3-state radius, searched archived newspaper clippings, press releases, public awards. Nothing, but then I remembered the certificate. The one, half reflected in the image. I went back to the photo, zoomed in as far as I could, and adjusted the lighting. This time, I saw the very edge of a seal at the bottom right, a gold circle. I'd seen it before. It belonged to Cordova County, a small, barely known jurisdiction wedged between Arkansas and Tennessee. One sheriff's department, population under 10,000. I searched Cordova County, Deputy of the year 2001. Boom, there he was, Deputy Gerald Miles, recognized for exemplary service in organizing search parties during the disappearance of a child named Bradley Wiggins. I froze. Bradley W. The name on one of the Polaroids. He'd helped organize the search for a boy who was later presumed to have run away. But that wasn't even the worst part in the article. There was a photograph of Deputy Miles holding a plaque. It was the exact same certificate I'd seen reflected in the Polaroid. Same font, same frame, same man. And behind him, hanging in the office, was the same photo of a barn door I'd seen in the background of multiple victim images. It wasn't just a match, it was confirmation. Deputy Gerald Miles had been the killer, or part of it. He was the one taking the photos, marking the maps, locking children in holes in the ground. I searched for recent news articles, obituaries, anything that could tell me what happened to him. That's when I learned he'd died in 2008. Apparent stroke, no investigation, no legacy, just gone. Part of me felt relief that maybe the nightmare had ended long ago, and this was all just uncovering a past horror, not a present one. But then I remembered the X on the map, the one that had never been marked, the one that was waiting, and the last date, written in red ink in the boxer's notebook. It was from 2021, 13 years after Miles had died. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the wall. This wasn't just his work. It never was. There were others, maybe even still active, maybe watching me, maybe waiting to see if I'd stop digging. But I couldn't stop now, because I'd made another discovery, one that nearly made me drop my laptop, the pink shoe I found in the forest. I took another look at the tread pattern in the photo I'd taken, and then I found a 2004 missing persons poster for a girl named Krista Donovan, last seen in a pink Reebok shoe with a lightning bolt on the side. Exact match, except her disappearance wasn't filed in Cordova County. It was filed in Lakewood. That's the town where I found the abandoned house. The house with the locked box. The one that was never supposed to be found. I hadn't slept in 2 days. There's something about realizing you're holding the personal collection of a serial killer, possibly a network of them, that fries your nervous system. Coffee stopped helping, so did pacing, so did locking. Every window in my apartment, the shoe, the photos, the map, the names, it was all part of something too organized. This wasn't the work of a frenzied maniac spiraling in chaos. This was coordinated, curated. So I went back to Lakewood, back to that goddamn house. I had to see it again. This time, not just with the curiosity of an urban explorer, but with the eyes of someone who knew what had been hidden beneath the floorboards. I figured maybe I missed something the first time. Maybe I was too spooked to see the bigger picture. But when I pulled up to the edge of those woods, I froze. The trail was gone. No overgrown path, no tire tracks, no broken branches, just dense, uniform trees and brush, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I even pulled up the GPS coordinates I'd saved from my first trip. The pin still dropped in my phone. I followed it, but there was no house. Not burned, not collapsed, just ... gone. I must have wandered that forest for 2 hours, my phone screen dimming every few minutes, the red GPS hovering exactly where the house should have been. I even found the rotting tree I remembered passing the first time, with the split trunk and tangled roots, but where there was once rotted porch, wood and boarded windows, now there was just grass, and silence. I started to wonder if I was losing it, if the whole thing had been some hallucination, some sleep-deprived delusion, until I stepped in it, a patch of mud, half covered by leaves, and sticking out of that mud was the rusted corner of a metal latch. I got down and started digging with my hands, tearing up soil and roots until I uncovered it fully. It was the trapdoor, the same one I'd pried open inside the house, except now it was just sitting in the woods by itself. No structure, no floor, no frame, just a trapdoor to nowhere. But it wasn't locked. It swung open with a sick groan, revealing a narrow hole filled with old leaves and insects. No ladder, no box. I reached down and pulled something from the debris. A photograph. It was damp and moldy, but I could still make out the image. A small boy in a white t-shirt, eyes puffy like he'd been crying, hands bound with what looked like extension cords. The setting behind him, the same basement I'd seen in the others, but this one had something new. On the wall behind the boy was writing, something scrawled in what looked like chalk or maybe paint. 2 words, dig deeper, and underneath it, in red ink that looked fresh, maybe even added later, was a date. July 12th, 2021. The same year as the most recent name in the notebook. The photo wasn't old. It had been planted there, for me. I sat back on my heels and tried to breathe. My hands were shaking. I kept looking around, half expecting someone to emerge from the trees with a camera, or a knife or a badge. But no one came, just birds, and the low creaking of trees in the wind. I looked again at the trapdoor, and this time I noticed something else. Carved into the inside of the wood, nearly invisible under years of grime, were initials .J.M. The same initials as James Martin. One of the names in the notebook, the same initials as a local deputy whose obituary I'd later stumble across. Another sudden death, heart failure at 4, to another badge, another piece of the network. But if they were all dead, who was planting new photos? Who was updating the notebook? And why leave the box just intact enough for me to find it? It didn't make sense, unless they wanted me to find it, to pass the message, or maybe to take the fall. Back at home that night, I finally opened the notebook again. There were dozens of scribbled entries I hadn't paid attention to before. Some were just names and dates, but others were short notes, cryptic, sloppy handwriting, smudged ink. One of them made me sit bolt upright. It said, "Let someone else carry the weight. Just make sure they open it alone." That was it. A trap, I thought. A cursed object, like something out of folklore past. Hand to hand until it ruins whoever finds it. Or maybe it wasn't supernatural at all. Maybe it was just protocol. Let the next guy take the risk. Let the next curious bastard open the box. That way, if someone ever got too close to the truth, the real, ugly network behind these crimes, they'd have someone else to pin it on. Someone who had a box full of names, maps, photos. Someone like me. That night, I put everything back in the duffel bag and zipped it shut. I stared at it for a long time. That bag could get me arrested, disappeared, killed. And yet, I couldn't let it go. Because the boy in that last photo, the one from 2021, he wasn't listed in any missing persons database. No one had filed a report. No one was looking for him. If someone was still out there, still taking, then I couldn't stop. Not now, not after I'd seen the hole, not after I'd heard what was inside it. Because before I left those woods, I heard something faint from deep in the ground. A sound like shuffling, like someone moving in the dirt, and a single, hoarse whisper, "Help." The day after I found that last photo, the one of the boy in the basement with "Dig Deeper" on the wall, I called in sick. Honestly, I don't think anyone believed me. I sounded like I hadn't slept in a week, because I hadn't. I was jumpy, whispering without realizing it, checking my rearview mirror every 5 seconds. My manager probably thought I was tweaking. Maybe I was, but I wasn't done yet. I couldn't let it go. I needed someone who wasn't part of the police or whatever this shadowy group was, to give me insight. I needed to know if I was looking at a series of cold cases or something worse. That's when I remembered Agent Ronald Wade. He came up in a podcast I listened to years ago. Some true crime thing about a child abduction ring busted in the late 90s. Wade was the lead profiler. Back then, the feds had uncovered an entire system of traffickers using storage units and decommissioned tunnels to move victims without a trace. The host had described Wade as brilliant, obsessive, and burned out. He left the FBI in 2002, after what they called a classified breakdown. But in a Reddit thread, buried under conspiracy theories and tinfoil rants, I found a comment claiming he still lived in upstate New York. Alone, no cell phone, no online footprint, just a mailing address, so I wrote him a letter. Nothing crazy. Just that I was looking into an old missing persons case, and I'd found something I couldn't explain. I told him it reminded me of the 97 cases he worked. I asked if I could send him photos. I didn't expect a response, but 5 days later, an envelope arrived. Handwritten, no return name, just a yellowed sheet of paper with blocky print. I remember. I never forgot. Don't email, don't call, drive here. Bring copies, not originals. If they see the box, you'll vanish like the rest. Below that, an address. It was real. A cabin near Letchworth State Park. Old hunting country near the Finger Lakes. I left at 4 a.m. the next morning. When I got there, I didn't even have to knock. The door creaked open before I stepped onto the porch, and there he was. Ronald Wade, older than I expected, gaunt eyes, sunken like someone who hadn't had a decent night's sleep in 2 decades. He didn't say anything at first, just gestured for me to come inside. His cabin was dark, books everywhere, dusty filing cabinets, at least 3 locked safes. He had maps pinned to corkboards and notes written in Sharpie all over the walls. It looked like a bunker built by paranoia and obsession. I handed him the manila envelope, just photocopies of the items in the box, the map, a few of the photos, a page from the notebook. He didn't react for a long time, just stared at the images like he was reading a language he hadn't seen in years. Then he pointed at the map. "You see these X's?" he asked. They matched sites we flagged back in 96. Places kids vanished without a trace. State parks, mining tunnels. One was under a church. I told him about the trapdoor. About the initials J. Carved inside. He nodded slowly. James Martin. That's not the original owner. It's the last mule. Mule. That's what we called them. The ones who carried the boxes. Passed the evidence along to the next guy. Never the same route. Never the same name. I felt cold. He leaned forward and dropped something onto the table, an old Polaroid. It showed a boy with bruised wrists, sitting in a room with peeling wallpaper and a rusted metal bed. He couldn't have been older than 9. On the wall behind him, in barely visible chalk, dig deeper, and the date. July 12th, 1986. Different decade, Wade said, but same message, same signature. I asked him who they were. The ones who made the boxes. The ones who took the photos. He paused a long time before answering. Then he looked me in the eyes and said, "You think this is about 1 killer or 10? It's not. This isn't about a person. It's about a system." He explained it like this. There was once a government-funded behavioral study in the 70s. Hush-hush stuff. Trying to create psychological profiles by exposing inmates to trauma materials. But things went sideways. Some of the inmates weren't reacting with fear. They were reacting with pleasure. Recruiters noticed. They started pulling those inmates into off-the-books projects soon. Boxes of training materials were being passed around, real ones. Photo documentation, audio, maps. It became currency, and over time, the collectors grew obsessed. They started making their own materials. Real murders, filmed and photographed like trophies. The worst part, some of them became cops, Wade said. Some became judges, teachers, youth counselors. They built careers around access. And when someone got too close, like a rookie detective with too many questions, the box got passed to them. The evidence chain was severed. The heat fell on the wrong person. Just like you, he added. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because he was right. I was the new mule. I asked him if he knew what the X's on the map really marked the exact meaning. He gave a humorless smile. Some of them are dump sites, he said. Others are trapdoors, buried vaults. The oldest ones date back to Prohibition, repurposed speakeasies, sealed bunkers. I've only opened 3, and his eyes went dead for a second. 2 had bones. 1 had something worse. He didn't elaborate. Instead, he pulled a small envelope from his drawer and handed it to me. Inside was a photo, newer, glossier. A surveillance shot, clearly zoomed in from a distance. It showed a man in a hoodie, crouched in the woods, placing something beneath a tree stump and in his hand. The exact duffel bag I had in my trunk. You're not the first, Wade said. But you might be the last. I didn't sleep that night either. That night's sleep was a cruel joke. I kept jumping at every sound. The creak of a floorboard, the hum of the streetlight outside, the distant bark of a dog. I double-checked the locks on every door and window before I went to bed. But that didn't stop someone from getting in. I woke up to the faint sound of movement in the living room. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But then, I saw the shadow. A tall figure moving slowly across the room. My heart exploded in my chest. I didn't think. I grabbed the nearest thing, a metal lamp, and crept out of my bedroom. The living room was dark, but the figure was hunched over something on my coffee table. My duffel bag. They weren't taking it. They were opening it. I froze. The bag was partially unzipped. The box inside was open. The photos scattered across the table. But then, I noticed something new. a small envelope, folded and tucked under the edge of the box. I couldn't see what was inside. The figure turned, suddenly, startled. I was frozen in place, then with a sudden burst, they dashed out the back door. I chased, but they disappeared into the night. The next morning, I found the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, a close-up of my front door, the lock with a tiny red X scratched into the wood beneath the handle, and a note, "You're next." The note was short, but it hit me like a freight train. "You're next." I stared at it for what felt like hours, the paper trembling in my hands. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave, to run, to burn the whole damn thing and disappear. But I couldn't. I wasn't just some random target. I was the next link in this chain, the latest mule carrying a terrible burden. I locked every door, every window, even the ones I rarely thought about. I changed all my passwords, cancelled subscriptions, started carrying pepper spray. But the feeling stayed, like eyes watching me, waiting for a moment of weakness. And then, the phone started ringing. Asterisk. The phone calls began. The very next evening, at first, it was just one ring. Then silence. I would pick up, but there was nothing there. Just static, the faintest whisper of wind or maybe breathing. I thought it was some kind of prank at first. Maybe a neighbor with a twisted sense of humor. But the calls kept coming, sometimes multiple times a night. The number was always blocked. No caller ID, no voicemail, just silence. It felt like the world was shrinking around me. The space between me and whatever was out there, closing fast. I started, recording every call, hoping to catch something. A voice, a word, a clue. After a week, I got one. A low, breathy whisper. Look deeper. It was barely audible, like someone was trying not to be heard. But it was enough. Enough to make my hands shake. Enough to make me realize this wasn't just a warning. It was a command. I couldn't stop thinking about the boy in that last photo. The one from 2021. The one with the words "dig deeper" scrawled behind him on the basement wall. I was starting to think the phrase wasn't just a taunt, it was a literal instruction. I began to obsess over the phrase. I scoured the notebook again, rereading every note, every name, every date, and then I found it, a set of coordinates, hidden in the margins of the map. Coordinates that didn't align with any of the red X's. Coordinates pointing to a place called Old Mill Creek, an abandoned industrial site, a few hours away from Lakewood, a place rumored to be a dumping ground for decades. I didn't want to go, not alone, but I had to. I called Wade, the retired FBI agent. I told him what I'd found. The voice was quiet on the phone. "Be careful," he said. "Old Mill Creek isn't just a dump, it's a maze, and not all the paths lead back." I packed my bag again, this time with more than a shovel, a crowbar, a first aid kit, a small camera, and a handgun. Not because I wanted to use it, but because I wanted to feel safer. I left at dawn. The road to Old Mill Creek was empty, eerily so, when I arrived. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no wind, just a faint buzzing from broken power lines. The mill itself was a hulking skeleton of rust and broken glass. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it recent, some of it decades old. I found the coordinates on the map matched the back entrance to the mill, a narrow door hanging on rusty hinges inside. The air was thick with dust and decay. My footsteps echoed through empty halls, I followed the map, passing old machinery, piles of debris, and rusted catwalks. Eventually, I found a stairwell leading down. The kind of stairwell that disappears into darkness. I pulled out my flashlight. The beam cut through the black like a knife. At the bottom was a door, heavy, metal, locked. I checked the handle. It was cold. I looked around for a key. Nothing. Then I heard it. A soft sound, a tapping, coming from inside. My heart hammered. I knew what I had to do. I rammed the door with my shoulder. It gave way, with a screech. Inside was a small room, lit by a single, flickering bulb. The walls were covered in photos. Hundreds of them, all of them faces. Some familiar, some new, some too damaged to make out. In the center of the room was a table. On it, an open book, a ledger. I opened it. Names, dates, places, all of them. Victims. But then I saw something new. A list of names with dates. Next to them, dates going forward into the future. People who had never been reported missing. People like me. I slammed the book shut, and that's when I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, heart pounding in my ears, the heavy breathing of the flashlight shaking in my hands. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, approaching from behind me in the cramped, dimly lit room filled with those haunting photos. The flickering bulb cast elongated shadows that danced on the peeling walls, making the space feel alive with unseen threats. I wanted to call out, to demand who was there, but my voice caught in my throat. I was certain whoever it was had been watching me for some time, maybe even waiting. The knowledge made the hairs on my neck stand straight. Slowly, I turned around. The figure was just at the threshold, partly hidden by darkness, wearing a dark hoodie pulled tight over their head. Their face was obscured, but their presence was undeniable. They held a small object in one hand, something reflective, maybe a phone or a flashlight. "Who are you?" I finally whispered, voice cracking. No answer. Instead, the figure stepped forward, each step echoing in the oppressive silence of the underground room. I took a step back, bumping against the table. The ledger was still open, pages fluttering slightly in the stale air. I glanced down, desperate to see something, anything that could buy me time. Suddenly, the figure held up the object, a phone. It flickered to life, displaying an image. It was me, taken that very day, outside the mill. No doubt. I swallowed hard. The figure spoke low, chilling. "You shouldn't be here." Their voice was cold but calm, unnervingly controlled. "Neither should you," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What is this place? Who are you people?" The figure tilted their head, studying me. "Some of us keep the balance," they said. "The box, the map, the photos, these aren't trophies. They're reminders, records. The system keeps itself clean." I shook my head, disbelief and horror washing over me. "Records of what you're talking about? Murder, kidnapping? How can you justify this?" They took a step closer, the shadows retreating with the flickering light, revealing a pale, scarred hand. "Justify?" The figure whispered, "There is no justification, only necessity. The people you saw, they were threats, problems to the system, those who don't belong." A cold realization hit me. This wasn't just some deranged group, it was an organization, with rules, with self-appointed judges deciding who lives and who disappears. "Why me?" I asked, voice barely audible. The figure sighed. "Because you opened the box." Before I could respond, the figure moved quickly, lunging forward. I stumbled back, knocking over the table. Photos spilled onto the floor, faces staring up at me with hollow eyes. I turned and ran. The stairwell felt endless as I scrambled upwards, heart hammering so loud I was sure whoever was behind me could hear it too. I burst out into the cold night, air gulping deep breaths. The silence outside was deafening after the suffocating darkness below. I looked back at the mill. The door at the bottom of the stairs slammed shut with a finality that froze me in place. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small handgun. For the first time, I truly understood what I was up against. This was no longer about uncovering the past, it was a fight for survival, and I had just become the next target. After escaping the mill that night, I should have run. I should have disappeared somewhere no one could find me. But the truth is, I was trapped, not just by whoever haunted those underground rooms, but by the tangled web of people I thought I could trust. I went back home, heart pounding, eyes darting to every shadow. The duffel bag, the box, was locked away in my closet, but it felt like it was screaming at me, begging for answers I wasn't sure I wanted to find. In the days that followed, paranoia swallowed me whole. Every phone call, every glance from a stranger felt loaded with menace. I started keeping a notebook of everyone I spoke to, friends, family, colleagues. I needed to know who might be watching, who might be feeding information to them. One name came up more than once: Detective Laura Collins. She had been assigned to the local missing persons task force for years. A woman known for her relentless dedication and a refusal to give up on cold cases. When I told her about the box and the photos, she was skeptical at first. But as I showed her the evidence, her eyes hardened. There was a flicker of recognition. "You're not the first person to come to me with this," she said quietly. "But most don't come back." She invited me to her office. It was dim, cluttered with files and photographs pinned to corkboards, some recent, some decades old. On the wall was a faded photo of a young girl with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. "Krista Donovan." "That's the girl with the pink shoe," I said. Collins nodded. Her case tore this department apart. No leads, no suspects, no arrests, but something about it didn't add up. I shared everything: the map, the box, the notes, the terrifying encounter at Old Mill Creek. She listened carefully, jotting notes, occasionally glancing at the photos pinned on her wall. Then she leaned in, voice low. "There are things I've uncovered, things they don't want anyone to know. The system Wade mentioned, it's deeper than you think. There are people inside the force, people protecting each other." I swallowed hard. "Are you one of them?" I asked. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No," she said, "I'm the one trying to bring it down. But it's complicated. There are layers, factions within factions. Sometimes you don't know who's your ally until it's too late." She reached into her drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy, black and white, of a man I recognized immediately, Deputy Gerald Miles, but these were recent, from last month. He was alive, or someone who looked exactly like him was alive. Collins looked at me, her eyes dark. "This isn't just history, it's happening now." I realized then that my fight wasn't just to uncover old secrets. It was to survive in a world where the past and present blurred, where the very people sworn to protect could be the worst threats. The next days passed in a blur. Collins helped me get a burner phone, taught me how to avoid being tracked, showed me encrypted messaging apps. But even with precautions, I knew the noose was tightening. One night, I got a text from an unknown number. 3 words: trust no one. I looked at Collins. She nodded slowly. We have to be careful. Whoever sent that, they're watching us right now. That night, I went to bed with a loaded gun on my nightstand and a prayer on my lips, because I realized the most dangerous person might be the one sitting beside me. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every creak in my apartment, every glance from a stranger, magnified into a threat. Detective Collins became my only anchor, but even she carried a shadow in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. The words "trust no one" echoed relentlessly in my mind. One evening, she called me with a hushed urgency. Meet me at the old precinct after hours. I found something. I arrived cautiously. The precinct was a hollow shell now of the staff had been reassigned or retired. Collins met me in a dimly lit hallway, clutching a manila envelope. Inside were files I wasn't supposed to see: decades-old personnel records, internal investigation reports, and most chilling of all, a sealed folder marked Project Monarch. The name struck me immediately. I'd heard whispers of Project Monarch, an alleged clandestine government program, rumored to have experimented on children for mind control and trauma-based conditioning. Most dismissed it as conspiracy theory, but here it was, in cold, bureaucratic print. Collins flipped through the files with trembling hands. These children, she said, were documented in ways that matched the photos in your box. The names, the faces, the datesits, all here. They were never missing. They were taken for experiments. Some were killed, others repurposed. She pulled out a thick dossier on one man, Gerald Miles. According to these records, Miles wasn't just a deputy. He'd been a field operative in Project Monarch, tasked with collection and containment. The documents detailed his involvement in abductions, psychological conditioning, and execution, but that wasn't all. There was an order signed by a name I recognized. Detective Laura Collins. My blood ran cold. I looked up at her. Her expression was unreadable. Why? I whispered. She sighed deeply. Because I'm part of it. Because I've protected the system for years. Because if it ever unraveled, I'd lose everything. My mind reeled. The woman who had helped me, who I had trusted implicitly, was entwined in the very nightmare I was trying to expose. She stepped closer. I wanted to control the narrative, to make sure the box stayed buried, but you were persistent, too persistent. I couldn't stop you. Tears welled in my eyes, not just from betrayal, but from the crushing weight of the truth. Why tell me now? I asked. Because you're dangerous, she said coldly. And because if you don't stop digging, others will come. People far worse than me. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. The sound of boots echoed down the hallway. I pulled my flashlight and handgun from my bag. Collins reached into her pocket. You have to choose, she said, voice low, before I could react. The door burst open. A group of men in tactical gear flooded the corridor. They grabbed Collins and dragged her away. One turned to me, dropped the weapon. This is not a negotiation. I stood frozen. The nightmare had found me at last. The moment the men in tactical gear stormed the corridor, everything spiraled into chaos. My pulse thundered in my ears as they seized Detective Collins and dragged her away without a word. The leader's cold eyes locked onto me as he barked, dropped the weapon. Now. I hesitated only a moment before lowering the gun. I wasn't ready for a fight I couldn't win. They cuffed my wrists behind my back with surprising efficiency. I tried to resist, but it was useless. The cold metal bit into my skin as they hauled me to my feet. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice hoarse but defiant. The leader smirked. "We're the cleanup crew. You poked a hornet's nest, and now you're in the crosshairs." They marched me through the darkened precinct, the walls closing in like the very nightmare I'd uncovered. The flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows, turning familiar hallways into hallways of dread. Eventually, they brought me to a nondescript office, locked and windowless, and shoved me inside. The door slammed shut, sealing me in darkness except for the glow of a single monitor. The screen flickered to life, revealing footage, faces I knew. The victims from the box, alive. Some scared, some pleading, and then the chilling sight of a figure in a hoodie, the same one from Old Mill Creek, placing a bag similar to mine in a hidden spot. My heart sank. They were watching me, monitoring every move. The monitor switched to a live feed, showing my own apartment. The box on my closet floor, untouched but vulnerable. I sank to the floor. The room's single speaker crackled. A voice I recognized instantly. Detective Collins, but different. "Calder, welcome to the system," she said, her tone dripping with finality. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, but you were a liability. The box was never meant to be found. It was a test, and you failed." I couldn't believe it. The woman who had been both savior and betrayer was now my executioner. But before I could process, the screen flickered again. New images. This time documents stamped confidential and top secret. The files detailed a covert operation, a deep state initiative involving high-ranking officials, law enforcement, and shadowy private contractors. Their goal: to control and silence those who threatened the balance of their power by creating a cycle of abduction, disappearance, and misinformation. The box, the map, the photos, they weren't just evidence. They were tools to manipulate, to threaten, to keep pawns like me in line. My head spun with the weight of it all. Then the door unlocked. Men in suits entered, their faces unreadable masks. They handed me an envelope. Inside was a single photo. It was me, taken that day at Old Mill Creek, with a red X marked on the corner. The final mark on the map. The last target. One of them stepped forward. "Your choices are simple," he said. "Cooperate, disappear, or become another name in the box." I looked up, meeting their cold eyes. The weight of the box in my mind, the faces of the victims haunting my thoughts. I knew then what the box truly was. Not just a ledger of horrors, but a prison, one with no walls, and I was trapped inside. The screen went black, the door closed, and the nightmare began. Story 2. When I was a kid, my dad was a man of science and silence. A forensic pathologist. They called him someone who spent his days peering into the dark corners of death, uncovering secrets that no one else could see. To me, he was just Dad, a quiet man with tired eyes, who came home smelling faintly of antiseptic and cold morgues. But behind that tired gaze was a world I never fully understood. Dad worked at the county medical examiner's office, a place I never visited, and he never really talked about his work. It was like he carried the weight of everyone's final moments on his shoulders, and it wore on him. The few times I asked what he did all day, he'd smile softly and say, "Helping people find the truth, even if it's a hard truth." His work was important, but it felt distant. something locked away behind a heavy door I wasn't allowed to open. At home, he was patient but reserved. He loved me, I know that. But the shadows of his cases seemed to cling to him even after he left. The morgue then, one day, that world went silent. Dad died suddenly, no warning, no long illness, just gone. The kind of shock that punches the air out of you and leaves you grasping for answers that don't come. After the funeral, I started going through his things. Dad's study was neat, almost sterile, much like the rest of the house, but there was one thing I hadn't noticed before. A locked drawer in his desk with a faded label scrawled across it in his handwriting. It was my name. I stared at it for a long time. Why would there be a file with my name on it? I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably some mundane thing, a medical record, a childhood note. But the locked drawer felt heavy with secrets, and something about it unsettled me deep down. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that my dad's death was only the beginning of something much darker. The locked drawer called to me. It was a door to a past I didn't know I had done, a truth my father had kept buried. Even from me, I had no idea then how far I was about to fall down the rabbit hole. The morning after the funeral, the house felt impossibly quiet. Too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something no one wanted to say out loud. Dad's absence wasn't just a void, it was a presence filling every room with a heavy, suffocating weight. I wandered through the house in a daze, touching things he had touched, trying to find some fragment of him left behind. His study was the hardest room to face. The smell of old paper, coffee stains, and something faintly metallic lingered in the air. I'd never been allowed in there alone before. It was his sanctuary, a place where he sifted through the dead to find their stories. Now it felt like a mausoleum, a place frozen in time. I sat down at his desk, the surface meticulously organized files, stacked by neat piles. A couple of pens lined up perfectly, his glasses resting atop a closed notebook. That's when I noticed it. A small drawer beneath the desktop, locked tight. There was something odd about an old-fashioned brass keyhole glinting in the muted sunlight. The first thing that caught my eye was the label taped across the drawer, written in Dad's familiar handwriting. It was faded and slightly peeling, but the words were unmistakable. My name. I blinked. My name, what the hell? For a moment, I thought it was a joke. Maybe Dad had been keeping some kind of baby book, or maybe it was a file on me for some bizarre reason. But why lock it away? Why never mention it? I ran my fingers over the cold wood, heart thudding painfully in my chest. My curiosity gnawed at me like a rabid animal. I couldn't ignore it. But I was scared, too scared of what I might find behind that drawer. What secrets could he have been hiding about me, or from me? I searched the study for the key, rifling through every drawer, every box. Hours passed, like minutes, and nothing turned up. Then, as the sun dipped low outside the window, I found it tucked inside an old Booker tiny brass key with a patina of age, almost hidden like a whisper. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock. It clicked open easily, almost mockingly, as if it had been waiting for me all along. Inside was a thick manila folder, worn at the edges, yellowed by time. On the front, again in Dad's handwriting, was my name, this time scrawled with an urgency. That sent a shiver crawling up my spine. Underneath, a date. It was from years before I was born. My breath caught. I opened the folder carefully. Inside were dozens of papers, photos, and typed reports. The first documents were innocuous enough notes, scribbled medical observations, something that looked like an early draft of a research paper. But as I dug deeper, the nature of the contents twisted into something far darker. There were photographs, black and white, grainy but unmistakably showing a child who looked exactly like me at different stages of infancy. I stared, unable to look away. There I was, captured in moments I had no memory of, dressed in clothes I didn't recognize, sometimes in settings I'd never been told about. Some of the photos were taken in hospital rooms, some outside on muddy ground, and some in places that looked like abandoned buildings. Each photo was marked with cryptic annotations in Dad's neat handwriting. Unidentified infant, cause of injury unknown, signs of trauma. Then came the documents that really made my skin crawl: autopsy reports, detailed, clinical descriptions of children who had died, victims of what seemed like violent crimes. The chilling part, physical descriptions, and even fingerprints that matched mine perfectly. The dates on these reports spanned years, overlapping with my birth and early childhood. I shook my head, thinking maybe I was misreading, or this was some kind of sick mistake. But the evidence was too consistent. And then, tucked between the pages, I found a hand-drawn map. It was of our town, or at least an old version of it, with several X's marked in places I knew well, including the park where I used to play as a kid. My heart pounded so loud I was sure my dad could hear it somewhere, telling me to stop, to walk away, but I couldn't. I was deep in the web now. I spent the next hours poring over every single document, trying to piece together a story that made no sense. There were notes about unidentified children, reports that had never been made, public and strange references to the subject, which seemed to be code for me. Dad's handwriting became more frantic towards the end, almost as if he was chasing a truth too horrible to face. At one point, I found a letter addressed to no one, but clearly meant for me. It was written in Dad's shaky script and ended with these words: "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. There are things about your past, about who you really are, that I could never tell you. This file is everything I found. Protect yourself. Trust no one." I dropped the folder onto the desk, trembling. What had I gotten myself into? That night, sleep abandoned me. My mind replayed the photos, the reports, the map. Questions raced through my head. Why was my name on a case file that started before I was born? Why did my dad keep this secret? What kind of danger was I in? And then, just before dawn, I heard it, the faintest creak from somewhere inside the house, like footsteps, or someone watching. I wasn't sure if it was real or just my fear twisting reality. But one thing was certain: the secrets in that locked drawer were far from over. And whatever truth my dad had uncovered was about to pull me into a darkness I never imagined. The morning light poured through the windows, casting long shadows across Dad's study. I hadn't slept a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those grainy photos, the ghostly images of a child I should have known but didn't. My mind was spinning with questions that had no answers. I had no choice but to keep digging. I pulled the folder back onto the desk and began sorting through its contents again, this time with a desperate need to understand what I was holding. The papers were old, brittle along the edges, but the ink was still sharp, as if the urgency behind the words had preserved them somehow. One document caught my eye, immediately: a typewritten report, marked confidential, stamped in faded red ink across the top. It was an autopsy report, dated a few weeks before my birth. The victim was listed as unknown infant. The report was meticulous and clinical, but the descriptions were haunting. Bruising consistent with blunt force trauma. Signs of severe neglect, yet the child had certain unique physical traits, usually light eyes. A rare birthmark on the left wrist. It was the same birthmark I have. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just about some anonymous child. It was me, or at least it seemed to be dot further into the folder. I found something even more disturbing. Handwritten notes from Dad, scribbled in the margins of printed documents, almost frantic in tone. Possible identity concealed. One note read, "Subject may have been swapped or replaced." Another line chillingly said, "Danger to subject. Unknown. Must monitor. Swapped. Replaced." What was going on? I found a folder labeled Timeline and began piecing together events. The timeline suggested that around the time I was born, there was a cluster of unexplained infant deaths and disappearances in our town cases Dad was investigating in secret. None of these were ever publicized. The official records I could find online made no mention of any such tragedies. Something didn't add up. I turned my attention to the photographs again, scanning each carefully. Some showed an infant lying on a hospital bed. Others appeared to be taken outdoors, under less clinical conditions, sometimes in dark basements or abandoned buildings. My stomach churned with the realization that these photos documented something no child should ever have to endure. Then I noticed a folder within the folder, smaller, more worn, with no label. Inside was a thin notebook filled with my dad's handwriting. It looked like a personal journal he kept alongside the official documents. The entries started off routine notes on cases, autopsy findings, laboratory results, but soon took on a darker, more urgent tone. One entry stood out. Day 112. The more I investigate, the more I realize this is no ordinary case. Subject shows signs of extreme trauma inconsistent with official reports. There is a concerted effort to hide the truth. I fear for the safety of the child and for my own. Day 112. That could correspond to the days after my birth. Was Dad writing about me? Another passage chilled me to the bone. I have come to suspect that the subject may have been deliberately removed from their family and replaced. I must protect the child at all costs. If anything happens to me, this file must be found. Why would my dad think I had been removed and replaced? I tried to think back to my earliest memories. My childhood was mostly normal, or at least I thought it was. But suddenly, I recalled gaps, moments that didn't quite fit. Why had I never met my birth mother? Why was I raised by my aunt? Why were my parents' stories always vague when I asked about my infancy? My head was spinning. I needed more information. That's when I found the map. It was folded carefully inside a plastic sleeve. The map was a rough sketch of our town streets, parks, buildings, but with several large X's marked in red ink. Each X corresponded to a location I recognized. The playground where I used to go after school. The abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. The old hospital where Dad had once worked. Next to one of the X's was a scribbled note in Dad's handwriting. Potential. Danger zone. Extreme caution. I ran my fingers over the map as if it could protect me or explain everything. The reality was far worse. Dad was warning me of places connected to this mystery. Places where something terrible had happened. As I studied the map, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. My heart stopped when I read it. Stop digging. Some truths are better left buried. A cold wave of fear washed over me. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone was watching. I shoved the folder into my bag and left the house, unable to stay another moment in that suffocating room, filled with secrets. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling dead leaves along the cracked sidewalk. The sun was setting, and shadows stretched long and thin, creeping toward me like silent fingers. I had opened a door to a past I never knew existed. A past that wasn't just about my dad or his work, but about me, and I didn't know if I was ready for what lay beyond it. The next few days were a whirlwind. I barely ate, barely slept. Every spare moment was consumed by the case file, its contents pressing heavier on my mind. It was as if my father's meticulous notes and photographs were reaching out from beyond the grave, pulling me into a chilling narrative I never signed up for. I felt like I was walking through a fog. Part of me desperately wanted to find answers, while another part screamed at me to stop before I got in over my head. But the mystery was alive now. It had roots deep in my past, and every clue only made the darkness grow. Among the documents was a series of medical records and autopsy reports that detailed children who died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances, none officially connected to me, yet the physical descriptions suggested a connection. These reports were written with surgical precision, but their content was anything but. Clinical. One report stood out in particular. It described a child with an unusual pattern of scars along the ribs and a birthmark identical to mine on the left wrist. The notes indicated the child's cause of death was undetermined, but there was a troubling mention of internal injuries consistent with abuse. The child was listed as unidentified. The date was close to my birth. How was this possible? Was this some kind of sick mistake, or was someone hiding something? I flipped through the photos again. They were scattered throughout the folder, sometimes slipped between pages, often annotated with handwritten notes. One series showed an infant, pale and fragile, lying on a cold metal slab in a morgue, face obscured but with that telltale birthmark clearly visible. Another was taken in a dark room, the infant's tiny hand clutching a torn piece of fabric. Each photo was more disturbing than the last. They weren't just images, they were frozen moments of trauma, moments someone had tried desperately to erase. My fingers trembled as I reached the last photo in one pile. A Polaroid with a date scribbled on the back. The image showed a small hand reaching out from behind a cracked wooden door. The handwriting below simply read, "Subject last seen here." The door looked eerily familiar. Was the door to an old storage room in the basement of our childhood. Home, a place I had always found strange, but never entered, that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the photos and reports. I went to bed, but was plagued by vivid nightmares. I dreamt of a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. I saw flashes of the hospital, of the morgue, and of my dad's tired face, pale and haunted. When I woke, my phone buzzed again, another anonymous message. "Leave it alone. You're digging into something dangerous." Fear gnawed at me, but it was mingled with determination. I had to know the truth. If Dad risked his life to hide this, I needed to understand why. The next morning, I started contacting people who might have known about these cases. I found the names of a few of Dad's former colleagues listed in his contacts. People who might shed light on what he was investigating. The first call went to a woman named Dr. Linda Harper, a forensic specialist who had worked closely with Dad. Her voice was warm but guarded when I explained who I was and why I was calling. After a long pause, she said, "Your father was obsessed with a case. It wasn't a normal investigation. He thought someone was covering up something terrible. He warned me once. He said if anything happened to him, I needed to protect you." Her words sent chills down my spine. Protect me from what? "I don't know everything," she admitted, "but it involved children who disappeared and bodies that never matched the reports. Your dad was convinced there was a pattern, a network, and he was afraid it reached far beyond the morgue." I pressed her for details, but she hesitated. "There are people who don't want this brought up again. Please be careful." The warning echoed the anonymous texts I'd been getting. It was no coincidence. The deeper I dug, the more I realized I was being watched. That evening, I found myself standing in front of the old basement door in my childhood home, the same door from the Polaroid. The wood was cracked and faded, the paint peeling in long strips. My hand hovered over the rusty knob, heart pounding so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I knew that whatever was behind that door was a piece of the puzzle my father had spent his life trying to solve. With a deep breath, I turned the knob. The door creaked open. Cold air hit me like a wall. Inside, dust motes danced in the thin shaft of light from the hallway. The room was empty except for a small box tucked in the corner, covered in cobwebs. I knelt and pulled the box out, my fingers trembling. Inside were more photographs, pictures of children, maps with more X's, and a small worn teddy bear. The same teddy bear I had as a child. Terror hit me like a freight train. Why was this here? Why was my bear hidden in a room no one talked about? What was my father protecting me from? I knew then that this was no accident. That room, those photos, it were the first pieces of a nightmare my dad had been trying to shield me from. And now, that nightmare was very real. After that night in the basement, I realized this mystery wasn't something I could solve alone. My father's case file and the hidden room were just the surface of something much larger and far more dangerous. The photos, the maps, the autopsy, reports, they all pointed to a conspiracy that someone wanted to stay buried forever. I knew the best chance I had was to talk to people who had worked closely with my dad, who might understand what he had uncovered. But I also knew it was a gamble. If someone had been threatening him, or trying to keep him silent, they might be watching me now. I started by digging through his old phone, emails, and documents, looking for contacts. There were only a few names that stood out, people he seemed to trust. The first person I reached out to was Dr. Linda Harper, the forensic specialist who'd already warned me to be careful. She agreed to meet, but only in a public place, small, quiet cafe across town. When I arrived, she was already there, looking older than I remembered from the voice on the phone, her eyes wary but kind. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, sliding the case file across the table. "I need to understand what my dad was working on." She took a deep breath and glanced around before leaning in. "Your father was obsessed with one case, an investigation he believed was being covered up at the highest levels. It wasn't just any missing children case. He thought there was a network, people trafficking children, possibly connected to some very powerful people." Her voice lowered. "He told me he was afraid. Afraid for you, but also for himself. He said this case was bigger than anything we'd ever handled." I felt my throat tighten. "Did he tell you any names? Any evidence?" Linda shook her head. "No names, only fragments. Your father kept most of his findings in that file. Have he trusted me enough to ask me to protect you if anything happened to him? The weight of her words settled over me like a storm cloud. I realized I was now the keeper of my father's darkest secrets. Next, I tried reaching out to Dr. Marcus Fields, a colleague known for his blunt honesty. The first few calls went unanswered. When he finally answered, his tone was cold, almost hostile. "Look, I don't know what you're after," he said, "but your dad got himself mixed in with things he shouldn't have. If you want to stay safe, drop it." "Why?" I asked. "What did he find?" He hesitated. "There are things in this town no one wants to talk about. The disappearances, the bodies. Your dad tried to shine a light on it, but the people involved made sure he didn't get too close." I could hear the tension in his voice. "They don't want this reopened. You should listen." Before I could press further, he hung up. I was left with more questions than answers. What had my father uncovered? Who were these people he feared? In the days that followed, strange things began happening. I found my car parked in different spots than where I left it. My phone would ring with no one on the other end. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. I wasn't alone in this investigation. I contacted another old friend of Dad's, Dr. Evelyn Monroe, who had been quieter about the case, but still willing to talk. Over tea in her cozy home, she shared a story that chilled me to my core. "Your father was haunted by one particular victim," she said, her voice trembling. "A child who never had a name in any official records. He called her Subject Zero. She disappeared years ago, but he believed her case was the key to unraveling everything." "Subject Zero," I repeated. "Yes," Evelyn nodded. "He thought that if he could find her truth, he could expose the whole network. But he was running out of time and trust. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became." I thought about the photos, the maps, the hidden basement room. I realized this wasn't just about my dad's work. It was about my own past, my own identity. That night, I sat alone in Dad's study, surrounded by his files. The weight of his secrets pressed down on me like a physical force. I knew that whoever had been watching him before might still be watching me now, but I had to keep going, for Dad, for the truth, and for myself, because, whatever he'd found, it was far from over. After meeting with Dad's former colleagues, the weight of what I was uncovering settled heavily on my chest. Their warnings echoed in my mind. "Be careful, drop it, you don't know what you're getting into." But at the same time, the puzzle was growing too big to ignore, and I felt a strange pull like a thread I needed to follow, no matter the cost. That night, my mind refused to shut down. As I lay in bed, I was pulled into vivid nightmares that felt more like warnings. In these dreams, I was a child again, but not the child I remembered. The air was thick and cold, and shadows danced at the edges of my vision. I saw a dimly lit room, a figure looming over me, a whispered voice calling my name, but when I turned, no one was there. I saw the basement room from the old house, only this time it was alive, with movement, shadowy figures moving just beyond the cracked door. I heard muffled cries, and the sense of something terrible happening was overwhelming. The teddy bear I'd found was there too, lying in the dirt as if dropped in a hurry. Each night, the nightmares grew more intense, more vivid. I woke up gasping for air, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. Sometimes, the whispers from the dreams seemed to follow me into waking hours. I heard faint murmurs when the house was still, felt the prickling sensation of unseen eyes watching me, and then strange things began happening in the house. At first, it was small. Objects moved out of place. The lights flickered without explanation. Doors I was sure I'd closed would be ajar the next time I passed by. One night, I swore I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom, slow and deliberate, but when I opened the door, no one was there. My phone buzzed constantly with those anonymous messages warning me to stop. But the strangest thing was, what happened to the case file itself? I kept it locked away in a drawer, but sometimes when I checked, papers had shifted or new notes appeared, notes I was sure I hadn't written. I started questioning my own mind. Was I losing it? Was the weight of these revelations cracking something inside me? One evening, exhausted and on edge, I decided to record myself talking through what I had found so far. Speaking out loud felt safer, more real. Maybe sharing the story would help me hold on to my sanity as I spoke. I glanced at the door and froze. In the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing just inside the doorway, dark, blurry, and almost transparent. When I blinked, it was gone. I didn't know if it was a trick of my tired brain or something else, but the feeling in the room shifted. Heavy, cold, charged. From that moment, the house felt less like home, and more like a trap. I realized that whatever my father had uncovered, whatever truth was buried in those files, it wasn't just history, it was alive, watching, waiting, desperate for answers and relief. I started researching sleep disorders and paranormal phenomena. I didn't believe in ghosts, at least. I didn't want to, but the evidence was mounting that something beyond explanation was connected to my father's secret. I tried to keep a journal of the strange occurrences, hoping to find patterns, to prove to myself that this was all real. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the dreams changed. Instead of just being passive observers, I found myself running in them, running from something fast and relentless. I heard my own voice screaming, begging for help. The shadowy figure from before became clearer, man. Or maybe something worse, with eyes that burned like fire. I woke with a start, gasping for breath, clutching my chest. I realized that whatever was haunting me was connected not just to the case, but to me personally. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't run from this anymore. I needed to face the past, no matter how terrifying. The nightmares and strange occurrences haunted me for days. But the reality was that I couldn't let fear stop me. The pieces of the puzzle were demanding answers, and I had to find out where this secret case file came from, how it came to be, and why my dad had hidden it away for so long. I decided to dive deeper into the origins of the file itself. Sifting through the documents again, I noticed that many of the papers were marked with dates and codes that I couldn't initially decipher. They weren't just random dates. They seemed to follow a timeline that traced back to the late 1980s and early 1990s, years before I was born. The earliest documents dated to a period when our town was smaller and quieter, but beneath the surface, something sinister was brewing. According to the files, a series of disappearances and deaths had occurred, mostly involving infants and young children. The official records were sparse, labeled as accidents, sudden infant deaths, or simply unexplained, but Dad's notes suggested otherwise. I found news clippings in the file, some yellowed with age, that chronicled vague reports of missing children, police investigations that seemed to stall without answers, and families left broken and desperate. The public had never been given the full story, and the media coverage was brief and non-committal. I remember being told as a child that everything in our town was safe, peaceful, that nothing like that ever happened here. But these files painted a different picture, one of fear, secrecy, and quiet terror. One document caught my eye, an internal memo from the police department dated around the same time. It referenced Operation Shadow, a covert investigation into a suspected child trafficking ring, but it was marked closed with no explanation. Dad's handwriting was all over this memo, along with annotations like urgent, do not trust, and file incomplete. I couldn't shake the feeling that this Operation Shadow was the heart of the mystery. I cross-referenced the locations on the map with the dates in the timeline. Each X marked a place, connected to a disappearance or an unsolved case. The abandoned warehouse from the photo, the park near my childhood home, even the old hospital, they were all part of this web. But what really shook me was when I discovered the file was connected not only to the town I grew up in, but to several surrounding counties. The cases spanned a wide area, far larger than Dad had ever let on. This wasn't just a local tragedy, it was a network. My mind reeled. Why had Dad kept this a secret from me? Why had he labeled the file with my name? As I dug further, I found personal notes where Dad referred to Subject A designation that seemed to be me. The note suggested he believed I was a key witness, or perhaps even a survivor of something horrific. But how? I had always believed I was just a regular kid raised by my parents. When I asked my mother about those years, she changed the subject quickly, her eyes avoiding mine. It was as if the past was a locked room she refused to open. I tried talking to my aunt, but she was equally tight-lipped, warning me not to dig into old ghosts. The more I learned, the more I realized my whole childhood might have been built on lies. Dad's death wasn't just a loss, it was a final silence. One night, staring at the stack of files on my desk, I finally understood. The secret case file wasn't just a collection of documents. It was a lifeline, a warning, and maybe even a key to my own survival. But survival from what? The answer was buried somewhere, in the tangled history of those missing children, and I was the only one who could find it. The more I uncovered about the origins of the case file and the dark history of our town, the more I realized I was staring into a mirror reflecting my own past, and a past I didn't want to face. I kept returning to one haunting question. What exactly was my connection to all this? It wasn't just the birthmark, or the photos, or even the cryptic notes that named me Subject A. It was the feeling that my entire childhood, the life I thought I knew, was somehow intertwined with these unresolved tragedies. I decided it was time to confront my family. I started with my mother. Her reaction was immediate and fierce. When I asked her about the missing children, the case file, or even why Dad had kept such a file with my name on it, her eyes filled with tears. She told me to stop digging, that some things were better left buried. Her voice trembled with fear, maybe guilt. Your father wanted to protect you, she said, her voice breaking. He was trying to keep you safe. But safe from what? I pressed, desperate for answers. She shook her head. I can't tell you. It's too dangerous. Just promise me you'll stop. I promised nothing. Next, I reached out to my aunt, the woman who helped raise me after Dad's death. Her face paled when I mentioned the case file. I don't know what you think you're looking for, she said coldly. But whatever it is, it's not the story you want to hear. She refused to explain further, but hinted that the truth involved people I shouldn't trust. That only fueled my determination. I scoured my earliest memories, trying to piece together moments that didn't quite add up. I remembered visits to hospitals I never understood, strange doctors asking questions, and a feeling of being watched even as a toddler. One memory stood out vividly: a cold, sterile room where I lay strapped to a table, surrounded by faces I didn't know. There was a man in a white coat, my dad, I realized with a start, who looked worried. He whispered something I couldn't hear, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. I realized then that my father's work wasn't just was personal. It was as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that included me as a piece. I began to suspect that I might have been at the center of the very case he'd been investigating, a survivor, or maybe even a target. The thought sent chills down my spine. Who wanted me gone? Why? And what had my dad discovered that made him fear? For my life, the more I probed, the more fragmented my childhood memories became. I remembered being taken to unknown places, secretive conversations whispered behind closed doors, and the sudden appearance of people who seemed to know too much about me. One day, while going through some of Dad's old belongings, I found a small box hidden beneath the floorboards in his study. Inside was a locket with a faded photo of a woman I didn't recognize, someone who looked eerily similar to me. There was also a folded note in Dad's handwriting: "She is the key. Protect her." The woman in the photo was probably my mother, or someone claiming to be. I realized my entire identity might be a lie, crafted to shield me from something far darker. I had been protected, hidden, and lied to, but by whom and why? As these questions swirled in my mind, I knew one thing for certain: the truth about my past was not just a story of missing children and dark conspiracies. It was my story, and to find out who I really was, I'd have to face the twisted connection that bound me to a nightmare my father died trying to solve. The days after confronting my family felt like walking through a fog. The fragments of truth were swirling around me, but every answer seemed to lead to more questions. My mother's tears, my aunt's cold warnings, and Dad's hidden messages in his files formed a puzzle that refused to fit together. Then, one evening, just as I was about to shut down my computer for the night, my phone rang. The number was unknown, no caller ID. I hesitated, but answered. "Hello." My voice sounded small, uncertain. A distorted voice whispered on the other end. It was rough, broken, and barely audible. "Stop digging. You don't know what you're getting into. They're watching." "Who is this?" I demanded, heart racing. There was silence, then a low chuckle. "You think your father died by accident?" He was silenced. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat frozen, phone clutched in my hand. Was this some sick prank, or was it real? The call felt like a door slamming shut, but it also opened a window into the nightmare I'd stumbled into. I couldn't ignore the warning, but I couldn't walk away either. Over the next few days, the warnings escalated. Anonymous messages appeared on my phone, on social media accounts I barely used, even slipped under my door. They were vague but chilling. "Leave before it's too late. They're closer than you think. Your father's secrets will bury you." At first, I tried to brush them off, but then strange things began happening again at home. I found my belongings moved, strange scratches on the walls, and once, the power cut out for exactly 13 minutes while I was alone. I felt eyes watching me constantly, the heavy weight of unseen surveillance. One night, I took a walk to clear my mind. As I passed the park marked with an X on Dad's map, I saw a figure standing just beyond the playground, shrouded in darkness. When I blinked, it was gone. I began documenting everything, the calls, the messages, the sightings. I started recording audio and video in my house, hoping to catch evidence. One recording caught my breath. In the background, faint but clear, was a whisper, "You can't hide forever." I felt trapped, hunted by ghosts, both living and dead. I called Linda Harper again, desperate for advice. "You need to be careful," she said. "There are powerful people involved. They don't want this exposed." "Why? What did Dad find?" "I don't know all of it, but I know it threatens people who operate in the shadows." "You're not safe." The call ended abruptly. I realized that the mystery my father had spent years unraveling was more than just cold cases. It was a dangerous truth buried beneath layers of lies and fear. The question haunting me every moment was, who were they, and why had Dad been killed? One thing was clear: the closer I got to the truth, the darker the shadows became, and they were closing in. The anonymous call and the escalating warnings left me in a state of heightened paranoia. Every creak in the house, every flicker of the lights, felt like a warning or a threat. But I couldn't let fear control me. If my father had been silenced, if his secrets had put me in danger, then the only way to protect myself was to understand everything he'd uncovered. I knew one place might hold answers: Dad's old office at the county medical examiner's building. Since his passing, the office had been locked up, but with the help of Linda Harper, I managed to get a temporary pass. She was hesitant, but agreed that seeing the place might help me piece together the puzzle. Walking into the sterile office was surreal. It was just as Dad had left it: cold metal cabinets, case files stacked on desks, a faint scent of formaldehyde, and cleaning agents lingering in the air. Everything was preserved in a way that made it feel like he might walk in any minute. I started by looking through his personal drawers. Most were locked, but one drawer caught my eye, the same style as the locked drawer at home, with a small worn key taped to its underside. My hands trembled as I inserted the key and pulled it open. Inside was a thick folder labeled with my name, just like the one at home. But this one contained more disturbing documents: detailed reports, case notes, photographs, and even recorded interviews. I pulled out a series of photos similar to those in the file at home, but here the images were more focused. Infants in hospital beds, children in the care of strangers, maps with routes drawn connecting various locations. One folder inside the drawer was marked Confidential Operation Shadow. I opened it carefully. Inside were police reports, notes, and maps that traced a suspected trafficking ring operating under the radar for years. The reports hinted at people with influence covering up the disappearances, and victims whose deaths were misclassified or hidden altogether. The deeper I dug, the more I realized the operation was sprawling, crossing state lines, involving people in positions of power, and somehow connected to my father's sudden death. Then I found a small, folded piece of paper wedged at the bottom of the drawer. It was a handwritten note from Dad, barely legible. "If you find this, know that the truth is dangerous. Trust no one. There is a place beneath the hospital, a hidden room where evidence was kept. Find it. It may be the only way to stop this." My breath caught. Beneath the hospital. I remembered the old hospital from the map, the one I'd never been allowed to visit. It was abandoned years ago, but was still standing on the outskirts of town, without hesitation. I decided that was my next destination. Before leaving, I took pictures of the files, determined to document everything. As I turned to leave, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I hurried out of the office, the shadows outside feeling darker, more oppressive. The truth was coming, and I was chasing it into the unknown. The old hospital stood like a ghost on the outskirts of town, its crumbling facade barely visible through the thick overgrowth of weeds and vines. Years of neglect had turned it into a monument to forgotten pain and buried secrets. But according to my father's note, somewhere beneath this ruin lay the key to everything. A hidden room filled with evidence that might finally expose the horrors he had uncovered. I arrived just before dusk, the sky bruised purple and grey, the air thick, with the scent of damp earth and decay. My heart pounded not just from fear, but from a desperate need to find answers. I stepped through the cracked front doors, which groaned like a living thing, and into the building's dark, cavernous interior. Inside, the hospital was a labyrinth of peeling paint, broken tiles, and shattered windows. Faint echoes of footsteps and distant dripping water haunted the silence. Dust motes floated in the dying light that streamed through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. It was a place where time had stopped and horrors had been frozen in place. I pulled out my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the narrow corridors. I found the directory sign, listing departments long shuttered: pediatrics, emergency, morgue. My father's note mentioned beneath the hospital, so I headed down toward the basement. The stairwell was steep and covered in grime. Every step echoed ominously. When I reached the basement, the air turned cold, like a breath from the past. My light caught something unusual, a metal panel in the floor, barely visible beneath layers of dust. I knelt and cleared the dirt away, revealing a rusty latch. My fingers fumbled with it, but eventually the panel creaked open, revealing a narrow stairway descending into darkness. A wave of fear rolled over me, but I pushed it aside and started down. The air grew colder and heavier. As I descended, the only sound was the scrape of my shoes against concrete and my own ragged breathing. At the bottom, a small room awaited bare walls, stained concrete, and in the center, a metal cabinet covered in dust. I approached the cabinet and found it locked, but this time I was prepared. I used a set of lockpicks Dad had left me in his study, a precaution I hadn't understood until now. After several tense moments, the lock gave way with a satisfying click. Inside were binders, files, and several sealed evidence bags. I pulled out a binder labeled Subject A, Case Files. Opening it, I found detailed notes on my own life medical records, surveillance logs, and surveillance footage documentation from when I was a child. The files revealed that I had been under constant watch, part of a larger investigation that Dad had been conducting in secret. There were references to attempts to protect me from certain individuals, but also mentions of threats to my life. Suddenly, I realized the full scope of what Dad had been trying to shield me from. Not just a local tragedy, but a sinister network that had touched my own life. Before I could process more, my phone buzzed violently. A message from an unknown number. "Leave now, or you'll disappear like the others." Panic surged, but I refused to back down. My father's death, my family's silence, the hidden files, they all led here. I had to keep going, as I gathered the files and prepared to leave. I noticed a faint noise behind me, the scrape of a shoe against concrete. I wasn't alone. I grabbed what I could and fled up the stairs, heart pounding like a drum. Outside, the night air hit me like a shock. The hospital loomed behind me, dark and unforgiving. The truth was out there, but so were the shadows hunting it. Back in the safety of my apartment, I spread out the files from the hidden room beneath the hospital across my desk. Each page felt like a key unlocking the dark corners of a past I never knew I had. But the most disturbing piece was a USB drive. Tucked inside the binder labeled Subject A, Case Files. I hesitated before plugging it into my laptop, unsure if I was ready for whatever was on it. But I had come too far to stop now. The files on the drive were surveillance footage, hours of grainy video showing a small child under constant watch. I watched as the camera pans revealed a toddler playing in a room filled with toys, but the gaze of the hidden observer was never far away. In some clips, I saw a woman watching over me, but the face was always blurred or hidden in shadow. Then, the footage changed. It showed a series of strange men arriving in a car, speaking quietly to each other. One of them glanced toward the camera, seemingly aware of its presence. The footage captured secretive meetings, exchanges of envelopes, and dark figures moving through alleyways and abandoned buildings. I felt sick. Was this my life? A surveillance operation? And what had my father been protecting me from? As I dug deeper into the footage, I found something even more unsettling. Clips of me as a baby being taken from one place to another, surrounded by unfamiliar adults. The footage seemed to document a covert operation, but why? Was I being moved to safety, or was I part of something else? I watched a clip where a man entered a room holding a small package. He looked around nervously before hiding it beneath a loose floorboard, the same spot where Dad had hidden that note about the secret room. The pieces were fitting together, but the picture they painted was terrifying. Suddenly, my laptop screen flickered and went black. I tried rebooting, but the device was unresponsive. I realized then that whoever had been watching me wasn't just threatening, they were active, trying to erase the evidence. Panicked, I grabbed my phone and backed up everything onto a secure cloud account. But I knew this was just the beginning. My father's secrets weren't safe yet, and neither was I. The next morning, I received another message. Stop before it's too late. You're in over your head. I stared at the screen, hands shaking. What had my father uncovered that put so many people on edge? What was I truly running from? The surveillance footage was a window into a past I never wanted to see. And it was clear the watchers were closer than ever. But I was determined to face whatever came next, because the truth was no longer just a mystery. It was my reality. After the unsettling revelations from the surveillance footage and the threatening messages, I knew I needed help. Someone I could trust. Someone who understood the stakes and the danger. But trust was in short supply, especially when so many powerful forces seemed determined to keep the truth buried. I reached out again to Dr. Linda Harper, the only person who had shown genuine concern for my safety and believed in the danger I was facing. We arranged to meet in a discreet cafe far from town, where whispers wouldn't travel and eyes wouldn't pry. When I arrived, she was already there, older, cautious, but with the same steely determination I remembered. Her eyes scanned the room before settling on me. "I've been following the situation," she said quietly, pulling out a small envelope. "Your father wasn't just investigating, he was close to something huge. This is a copy of files he shared with me, pieces he couldn't keep in his office for safety." I opened the envelope, feeling the weight of years of secrecy and danger. The files detailed names, dates, and locations tied to the trafficking network, and a list of suspected collaborators, people with political connections, law enforcement ties, and wealthy backers. This is why your father was targeted. Linda said. He threatened to expose them all. I swallowed hard. The scale of the conspiracy was overwhelming. Linda leaned in closer. There's someone else, a whistleblower, who contacted me recently. Someone who claims to have proof and wants to meet you. Hope flickered in my chest. Where? I asked. She hesitated. At an old warehouse on the edge of town. It's risky, but this could be the break you need. I nodded. I knew the risk. But I had no choice. I had to keep pushing forward. That night, I drove to the warehouse, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The place was dark, surrounded by rusting metal and broken glass. I parked a safe distance away and approached on foot, flashlight in hand. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. Then, a figure stepped out from the shadows. A man, mid-30s, wearing a hooded jacket. You must be Subject A, he said, voice low but urgent. I nodded. Who are you? My name's Michael. I used to work for them, the people behind the disappearances. I couldn't stay silent anymore. He handed me a small flash drive. This has evidence, documents, videos, recordings, enough to bring down some of them. I took it, my hands trembling. Why help me? Because your father saved my sister, and because the truth needs to come out. As we spoke, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others fighting in the shadows, risking everything. But the danger was real. Michael warned me that the network had eyes everywhere, and that my every move was likely being watched. I left the warehouse with the flash drive clutched tightly, the weight of the fight ahead settling over me. For the first time, I had an ally, but also a target. And I knew that from here on, nothing would be the same. Back at my apartment, I sat down with the flash drive Michael had given me. The weight of what I was about to uncover felt heavier than ever. But I knew this was the moment I'd been preparing for. The moment to bring light to the darkness. My father had fought so hard against. I plugged the drive into my laptop, bracing myself. Files began to load. Videos, documents, audio recordings, a digital trove of damning evidence. The videos were raw and unsettling. Covert footage of meetings, exchanges, and conversations implicating several high-profile individuals. The audio recordings included whispered confessions and detailed plans for trafficking routes, all pointing to a well-organized, deeply entrenched network. One video showed a meeting between an official I recognized, a politician who had publicly championed child protection, and a man who spoke coldly about disappearing liabilities. My stomach churned. The documents included names, dates, and places, some overlapping with the cases in my father's files, each piece connected to the other, forming a horrifying web of corruption and cover dash-ups. As I worked through the files, I felt a mixture of horror, anger, and determination. This was the truth Dad had died protecting, the truth that so many wanted buried. But I also realized the risk. Possessing this evidence made me a threat to powerful people. I needed to be smart. I reached out to Linda and Michael, and together we planned how to release the information safely through trusted journalists and advocacy groups who could protect the identities of survivors and whistleblowers. The next days were a blur of encrypted emails, secret meetings, and cautious steps. Then, just as we were preparing to go public, I received a final, chilling message. Last chance. Stop now, or you'll never see the light of day. Fear gripped me, but so did resolve. I thought about Dad, his tireless fight, and the children whose voices had been silenced for too long. We released the evidence quietly at first, giving the media and law enforcement a chance to investigate without exposing sources. The response was immediate. Investigations were launched, names were called out, and some powerful figures faced scrutiny for the first time. But the fight was far from over. The network was still out there, still dangerous. I was now a public figure in this nightmare, but I was no longer alone. For the first time, the silence was breaking, and I was ready to keep fighting for the truth, for justice, and for those who couldn't speak. The fallout from releasing the evidence was immediate and overwhelming. Headlines splashed across every news outlet, documentaries and podcasts picked up the story, and the public was horrified by the scale of the conspiracy my father had uncovered and ultimately paid for with his life. I was thrust into a spotlight I never wanted, receiving messages of support, condolences, and sometimes threats. But the hardest part was witnessing how deeply the pain had spread. Families shattered, survivors coming forward, and a community forced to confront its darkest secrets. Law enforcement agencies reopened cold cases, some of which had been dormant. For decades, arrests followed, though many perpetrators remained elusive, protected by their wealth and influence. Michael stayed by my side, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. Linda became my confidant and strategist, helping me navigate the legal and emotional complexities that followed. But the scars ran deep in me, in my family, and in the town we'd all thought was safe at times. The nightmares returned, whispers of the past echoing in my dreams. The shadows of those lost children lingered, their stories demanding justice. I visited the abandoned hospital one last time, standing outside in the fading light, thinking of my father, a man who dedicated his life to finding the truth, no matter the cost. The hidden room beneath the hospital was sealed off, but the secrets it held would no longer stay buried. I realized that this journey had changed me. The daughter of a forensic pathologist had become a witness, a bearer of painful truths, and a voice for the forgotten. I didn't know what the future held, if the network was truly dismantled, or if the shadows would rise again. But I knew one thing: I would never stop searching for answers, never stop fighting for those who had no voice. And I hoped that, someday, the darkness would give way to light. For now, I carry my father's legacy forward, a testament to courage, truth, and the unbreakable bond between a father and a daughter. This is our story.